I want to celebrate your game a little bit. I said to Alon off mic, like, this isn't about like reviewing your game demo at you, you know.
You should do that. Review the fun factor.
The fun factor? It's my hair is getting all crazy.
Welcome to White Flag. Welcome to another Wide Flank Dev Talk. Today, Sean and I are joined by writer and editor Merritt K. We'll be talking about Merritt's vampire reality show visual novel game, Fledgling Manor. Hi, Merritt. We're so happy to have you on.
Hey, I'm happy to be here.
Cool. So, Merritt, get right into it. Why vampires?
Sorry, I'm a little loopy. I just came from kickboxing and I'm very tired.
What did you do?
I kicked and boxed.
Okay.
In that order.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I am so.
We'll be mindful of
my brain.
The energy.
I took like a bunch of hits to the brain, so I'm like,
oh god,
yeah, it's like, just shaking around in there.
Like you were fighting, like sparring, or like
just imagining your brain in Jello, like it's moving, but it's really just jiggling.
Yeah, it was a real scene. It was like, yeah. Did you watch the Jake Paul thing? This is not about vampires.
I did.
You
sadly.
did? Okay, yeah.
I'm pissed that I watched it.
It bummed me out. Like,
it's sad all around. There's nothing. There's no good outcome there unless there was a single punch that knocked Jake Paul's head into the rafters.
Which I think is the only reason everyone watched.
Yes, but like, obviously that wasn't going to happen.
Obviously, it was never going to happen.
It's like a spectacle, and that's what reality shows are about too, is spectacle, and that's what our game is about, is spectacle.
Oh.
Yeah, I've been on podcasts before, so
yeah.
I got okay at doing the segues.
Bada boo.
But yeah, so it's what was the question? Why vampires?
It was supposed to be like a easy, just like a why vampires?
Why vampires? I mean, I think they're like just an enduring cultural image. They're like up there as one of the most culturally like rich monsters in kind of Western culture, at least. There are also vampires in Eastern cultures as well, and around the world. There's they're called Jiangxi in China.
Yeah, you mentioned it in the demo.
They hop. I don't know if that's a real thing. They do hop around. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. And I grew up watching movies like Blade.
Fuck yeah.
Briefly playing Vampire the Masquerade, the tabletop game, when I was
I don't know that.
a teen. That's like where so much of the like gothy kind of vampire, like modern day stuff comes from. That and Anne Rice, obviously. And that game kind of borrows some Anne Rice stuff. But there've been a bunch of games based on that property too. A lot of them haven't done super well. There's one that's been in development right now for like years and years,
like a decade, right?
Yeah, and it keeps getting passed off to different devs, and it's like a whole real nightmare. Like studios are shut down, whole things happen. It's really, I think Chinese Room is working on it right now, but yeah. So that it's just sort of a topic that I think is rich. There's like a lot to work with there.
So it's rich, like in our culture and in our world and in our species, but like also it's like the references you're making to vampire stuff are like pretty specific. Like it's not just like vampires. It's like so have you, I don't know why I'm asking this, but like have you like enjoyed vampire shit like your whole life basically, or
yeah, okay, so I don't know, it's funny, my experience with horror is I think pretty atypical. I didn't watch horror movies until I was in my early 30s. I was like a very anxious child.
You're scared.
I couldn't even watch just like tense action TV or movies because I was like, oh my God, this is really, James Bond Jr. is really going to die, or like, like Gem and the holograms are like really in trouble here.
Wishbone is fucked.
That dog is going to get run over by that tractor. It was around the start of the pandemic, a little before that my friend Danielle Riando, who is now an editor at Game Developer,
cool.
We worked together at Fanbyte, and she's been a big horror person forever, and she got me into horror movies. And that started with like 80s kind of like schlocky, like funny stuff, like Nightmare, things like that.
Like less overtly trying to like fuck with you and more like
yeah.
like,
And I still don't watch like a ton of like the newer stuff like Terrifier or things like that. Like, but I like a good vibey horror, like a good Carpenter. Yeah, I have seen like a lot of vampire movies, and some of them are like among my favorite movies of all time, like Near Dark, which is Catherine Bigelow.
Never seen it.
It's a lot of people haven't because it's kind of hard to find. But she's really best known now for like movies about cops in the military.
Right.
And it's a shame because she made these great movies in the 80s. Like Near Dark is this vampire, like Southwest kind of movie.
Okay.
Very odd setting for that kind of story, but
really
it
sunny
works really
also.
well. Yeah. Bill Paxton is incredible in that movie. He plays just a total psychopath. There's like a bunch of other 80s movies. Like I feel like it's one of these things where every few years kind of culture goes back to be like, oh, let's go back to the vampire well again, right? It's like in the 80s you had Near Dark, you had Lost Boys, you had Fright Night, great movie. And then the 90s you had Buffy, and then 2000s Twilight. And it's like every few years we get tired of it and then we go back to it. So yeah, I guess, I don't know. I think there were a lot of games too coming out a few years ago that were about that topic. Like there was,
go for it.
V Rising, I think it was called. And Vampire Survivor. Okay, this is the thing. If Vampire Survivor hadn't come out, that's what we would have called the game.
Really?
It's a reality show game.
Oh
but
my God.
It's a reality show with vampires.
Obviously.
Like it's Vampire Survivors. How are you going to look at our game and say, oh, this shoot 'em up, that's Vampire Survivors? And it's like, great game, by all accounts. I haven't let myself play that because I can tell it's one of those games that I would like.
Oh, you'll get
be
lost.
up until 3 a.m. Like that happened with Slay the Spire, and I just can't do that anymore. But
it definitely like begets itself.
Yes, yeah. I can't play roguelikes anymore. I've realized that about myself. They're just too addictive.
Sure.
The one more is too strong with them.
Yes. Just one more run. That's fine.
One more run. I was so close to being a fucking god, and then it's like, oh, you didn't do it again. Yeah,
you can see.
Yeah. Cool. So vampires are sick, man. I don't know. They're like among all the horror genres and everything. For some reason, vampires are always fucking cool and hot and horny and like. I guess like being immortal, they're like. Young looking, like because they could have all looked like Nosferatu and just been like hairy rats, and it's like they wouldn't be this whole like obsession with them, but it's like they're always hot and cool.
I think that the hot thing is like a big part of it, and that's been different across different myths, right? Like vampires aren't always these like. Sometimes they're more just like monstrous, and there are characters in our game who are more like Nosferatu, but.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, what are the other big monsters? Like werewolves, zombies. Those endure for different reasons, I think. I think Simon Pegg has this great bit where he talks about like he was really mad, I think, about 28 Days Later because he was like, zombies shouldn't run. It completely destroys the whole theme of zombies, which is like the creeping encroachment of death.
Yeah.
You can run from it, but it will always get you. Whereas like werewolves are kind of about the fear of like nature and animals, and vampires are about sexuality and like that kind of stuff. So they're all these big themes. But
is there like an underlying theme to all of this monster shit that's like ultimately it's about people? Like these are all like people centric things. Like we're afraid of ourselves and like what's in us. And
because I mean there are like there's things like dragons or sea monsters, and those are just more just like the unknown, right? Those are like here be dragons. People would go sailing and be like, oh, there's sea monsters out there. Yeah, and it's like a different category almost of like of creature because it's not like so close to home.
Totally, yeah, and that's like it's like a very. I mean, we're going in on just like movie monsters, but like 20th century like horror stories, I think do tend to be a little more like they're not set. It's not about being set in cities, but they like seem to be like developed by people who are like deep into society in a way that it's just like people is what we have access to. Like the unknown of like a monster in a lake is a little less, like it's less accessible or something. Or,
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
I found this psychotic page. Well, I found it through this other podcast called 2.0, which is a great podcast. They did an episode called Vampires 2.0 years ago. And they found this page, I should say, not me. It's a list of vampire traits in folklore and fiction. And they list like every vampire fictional world that's ever existed. And every like category you could ever imagine in appearance, weaknesses, everything. And they say like, oh yeah, they're weak to this. They're like, can't be killed by this, can't be killed by that. I'm going to play a little game with you guys. I'm going to give you guys one. I picked out one of them.
Okay.
And just because to show you like the vastness of this page, and I'm going to give you in order just some of the stats and you guys can guess who the person is or like what the world is, right?
Oh, like what the culture is that produced
what vampire world
what,
this
like
is
fictional
from.
world or whatever?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Whoa.
So here's appearance, skin color, tanned, has fangs, can see their own reflection, has a shadow, attractiveness, comical. So it's hard right now. It's hard right now.
And
Yeah, weird, right?
Like,
weird.
It's like,
Okay, check this out.
bad.
Weaknesses. Not weak to sunlight, running water, or invitation. Unknown if they die via stake, decapitation, drowning, fire, silver garlic.
what? This is just Superman.
But does get soggy in milk.
what do you mean?
Is this Count Chocula?
Yes, it is.
Fuck.
Dude, this website is so sick.
Count Chocula's immune to. Wow, that's shit. I mean, like, would he die if you just shot him with like a regular gun? Like,
apparently, I don't know. But just to finish the Count Chocula, the last thing is supernatural powers. So sick. Is immortal. Has enhanced strength. Has enhanced speed. Can fly. All of this is Count Chocula.
oh my god.
Practically no other superpowers except for the final one, which is turns milk chocolatey. Very good. That was the final clue.
Yeah.
That was the final clue. Thanks for playing my game.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah,
Alon.
of course.
I mean, that's like a thing too that we wanted to kind of be careful about because I feel like in any setting, like whether it's a game or a movie or book series, there's this temptation to get really deep into the weeds on like the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I find that stuff kind of boring. There's like, this is like a part of a broader complaint I have about fiction where like a lot of popular fiction now, I guess people like it, right? People like, oh, what's the magic system in your fantasy stories? And like,
Right.
Yeah.
I don't really care. And it also kind of makes magic less magical and interesting if there is like, oh, you mix these ingredients and that casts a spell in this way. But like people like Brandon Sanderson, so I'm like wrong in this, I guess. But it's my game, so I don't have to listen to Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah.
So you know, we try to like get the rules out of the way very quickly of just like, okay, here's a rundown. Here's like, it's basically, you know this, all this stuff, right? Let the head come off. It's dead now. The stake in the heart is bad. Don't happen that. Yeah. Sunlight, obviously.
That was one of the first gags I liked in the game. Was just like 3 out of 4 of those things kill a normal person too. So like, don't worry about it.
You're probably avoiding getting your head cut off as a human being
in your waking hours.
The sun is the big one, really.
Yeah, I do want to. I want to celebrate your game a little bit. I said to Alon off mic, like this isn't about like reviewing your game demo at you. You know,
you should do that. Review the fun factor.
The fun factor. It's my hair. My hair is getting all crazy. But truly, like that mechanism, like from the get, I was like, oh, like this is gonna be fine, because like the mechanism of like the tape cassette thing, like set out so many, just like that initial scene. And I don't mean like the car crash. If you haven't played the demo yet, play the demo so you know what we're talking about.
It's free. You can wishlist the
Just
game.
play the game.
Just pop off. Play the freaking game. Yeah.
But like
anyway,
waking up in the dungeon room, it's like, oh, the sense of space is super clear. And then there's like an audio oriented mechanism that just sort of like lays out a bunch of information like really succinctly while like Rocky is like commenting on it. So you're getting like character, sound, setting, like all at once, kind of. And like that's something I just wanted to like maybe open up the conversation into, though, of like, is that something that your team is like taking like very seriously, like how to blend sound and character and setting? Like, or is this like a standard in the visual novel? I don't know. I've played like Phoenix Wright, which like
yeah, I'm actually replaying. Well, not even replaying. I'm playing the first one for the first time right now.
What do you think?
I played 2 and 3 like a decade ago, but when those games first came out, it was really hard to find the first DS game. I think they just didn't do a huge print run of it because they were like, we don't know if Americans are going to like this.
Right. It was sketchy. Yeah.
But yeah, I love those games. And truth be told, I haven't played a ton of visual novels either. So a lot of the choices and like the decision making on this stuff are from my co-writer and one of the other people on the team, LB. And yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, right? So yeah, for people who maybe haven't played the demo, the game is a visual novel, which is a format or a genre that is really associated with dating sims. This is not a dating sim.
Okay.
Like it's, that kind of like, I'm like transferring to a new school. Who am I going to date at this school? There are some really good ones of those. Like, I don't mean to dismiss them because I think that's something that a lot of people who set out to make something like this do, is they're like, we're going to make a visual novel that doesn't follow the tropes and rules. And it's like, okay, guys, we've all played Dream Daddy. We've all seen the KFC visual novel. Yeah. We've all done this. And it's like,
it's like you either know and it doesn't matter, or you don't know and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So
and you're like so it's like, oh my God, wow, a visual novel where you're dating cleaning supplies. That's crazy.
What?
It's a little old hat at this point. So there's, certain conventions of that genre. Most of the information is presented through text, either just like descriptive or dialogue. And then there is like this audio element and like a limited visual element too. And because the game is set in one house, like it's set in and around this big house, we tried to have the setting be very like distinct, like having these different rooms you enter and leave, having sort of different music associated with different parts of the house or different moods. Just even little things like I think having sound effects in that format can really help, because it's like when I've been playing Phoenix Wright, you notice things like, the way that like there's like a little sound effect or like a little visual effect when something happens, it can really like convey a lot. And even though you're just mostly looking at still images of the characters, like you're like, I feel I can see what's going on here through a combination of like reading this and the visual suggestions of it.
It creates this like swirl of an effect kind of that like was kind of hard for me to pin down. Like the effect was that it was immersive, but like at any given point, it was like there was all these different component pieces in your game, in your demo. Like,
thank you. Yeah.
It was like a really like the swirl of it was like really effective, I think. And like, again, my point isn't just be like, I like your demo. It's more like, I do want to ask like specific questions about like how did you as a team like decide how to use sound in the game? Like less music and more like sound cues. Like, cause like it was such a statement of like, this is a tape deck. It sounds this way. It's over here in the room. Like,
right.
Yeah.
I think so much of it, is down to creating a sense of like place or like movement. With the tape deck, that's like a scene where not much is going on in terms of movement around in the room or anything. You're sort of just standing there like listening to this tape. So having the sound of it going enhances that a little bit. It kind of livens it up. And then, just things like creaking doors and stuff. Like I have certain like, cues in my mind too, when it comes to game sound effects, like a door opening. There's a sound effect from the first Resident Evil that I always hear, like the
Yeah.
So just like a little like borrowing from things like that. And also we are kind of limited in the fact that we're using like we did commission music for the game, so we have like a musician who created all the tracks, but for the the sound effects we're using, like, for the most part, public domain stuff, right? Like we didn't do our own Foley on this. It's the budget for this game is very, very small. It's basically non-existent. It's our own money that we put into it. And
who's got the time and space for Foley?
I mean, it sounds fun. It seems like a lot of fun, like waving big metal sheets for thunder and stuff like that. But one of the harder ones to get, and I think we might still change it. If you play the demo, I think a lot of things have changed from the demo. But the biting sound, it's really hard to get like a good sound for that, because like realistically, it's like, punches and impacts and things like that don't make the sounds that they do in movies, right? But we expect to hear those things.
Yeah.
And like a bite, you expect to hear like a crunch or like
slicing.
So
when you need like a mic in your mouth or something, biting an apple or something.
I think we did settle in the full version of biting an apple, kind of like But you might be surprised it's hard to find. You can search sound effects on these public domain stuff. There's
Free
no
sound.
like sound of teeth sinking into human flesh. No one's done that, huh?
So you sort of like, are you like are you doing any like higher level sound design in that way of like combining sounds, or is it like sort of like, this needs this sound, let's try to find it, we've got a million other things to do? Like,
I mean, there is some of that stuff. Some of the later scenes that get a bit more complex in terms of the actions of what's happening. Like there are fight scenes that happen later on in the game, and for those, it's like it doesn't work quite as well to just have like a punch sound effect. Like you have to sort of layer them in ways that are interesting. So, we're doing the kind of classic, like I feel like this happened in Buffy a lot. When people fought in Buffy, they just sort of threw each other around the room because they all had super strength. But if you just snap someone's neck, the fight's over, and that's not an interesting thing storytelling wise. So there's a lot of just like throwing people into furniture that smashes, and it looks really dramatic and cool. So we have a lot of that stuff. With like trying to layer these sound effects of like, okay, this is like a sound of like a, the table smashing, and these are the sounds of like the blows raining down on someone while that's happening.
It's like these moments like that you're trying to highlight, like action moments that you're not depicting visually as such. Like exactly. Like, and some of those scenes like are depicted visually by what's called CGs, which is it's one of these genre conventions, right? Like they call them CGs, and that's when it's like a full screen depiction of like a character. And I think it just stands for computer generated or computer graphic. But like that's what they called them like back in the day. And sorry, I'm getting over a cold as well. But I've got a lot going on, kickboxing, cold.
Holy.
But I'm just, my body's falling apart. But
pushing it to the limit.
But so we have about 10 or 11 CGs, which are those full screen splash images. So some of the more impactful scenes are depicted that way, and that's a pretty common thing in the genre too.
I was gonna sort of also ask, just like almost a step back, like why visual novel? Like, because you come from. I was sort of expecting you to be like, oh, I love this game and this game and this game, but that's like clearly not the case. And like, you're a writer, you have like a writer background. So, why visual novel, not just like a novel? Like what sort of like drew you and your team to this sort of specific, format?
Yeah. So, I'd actually collaborated with our artist Shade on a comic early this year. And it was originally I was working on this idea with someone else, and he had to drop out of the project because he had some other stuff going on.
Sure.
And I had known Shade through Twitter and through like through their art and just through like some of their comics and stuff like that. And we did this comic together, which is not about vampires or anything. It's kind of like a very like lo-fi horror story about someone being stalked by this kind of shadowy presence in the woods.
Mhm.
And
Scary.
yeah, it was, you know, it's fun though, right?
Sounds
And it was,
really scary.
it's kind of scary, and it's kind of about like weird, like I don't know, not self-improvement stuff, but like kind of there's a lot of weird like elements of like Buddhism, and then
Cool.
you know, personal growth kind of stuff. So that was a really fun project, and I had been wanting to do a bigger game kind of project for a while. And so I approached them about it and was like, because their background make it sound like they go to school for drawing, you know,
Sure.
werewolves and stuff. But I knew of them through their art and comics, which are about these characters that they had created, which were originally from Vampire the Masquerade and have kind of like spun off into their own little world. So they have Nico, who is the host of Fledgling Manor,
Right.
is a character from that existed already in Shade's comics. Like that's like their main guy who they like do stories about.
Shade
so
loves
he's like
Nico.
we borrowed Nico. And
I loved now that's a vampire. When you get like that, that was so sick. It was like a that's Chappie kind of moment for me.
Yeah, and he's like a really great over the top kind of design. He's this very like kind of like 2000s like giant guy who doesn't wear a shirt and just has this big fur coat and these little glasses. And
he's got snake bites, right? Like
he does the snake bite piercings. And they've done some really fun comics about him and a few other characters. And so we were, you know, talking about doing this together. And I kind of realized like, okay, yeah, like a visual novel would be the kind of easiest thing to do in terms of turnaround and like resources. Like we have a writer and an artist. Like, okay, that's the easiest thing to do with this. Like other than another comic. And it's actually easier than a comic for an artist because you're creating like these still images of characters and then, you know, changing the expressions or changing the pose a little bit, but you're not drawing a completely different shot every scene, right?
Right.
Or creating models that you then have to like manipulate. So but I realized like, oh, you know, like I actually don't know that much about visual novels.
Yeah.
Like I played a few. I have played a few. Like I did play Dream Daddy when it came out. I have played a couple of Japanese ones. You know, I've loved Phoenix Wright, which is a kind of combination of visual novel and adventure game.
There's a bunch going on.
It has a lot
Citizen Sleeper is the one for me. I mean, I think people call it an RPG, but that was totally a visual novel in my opinion. And I loved it and I thought it was super sick. But that was like my only experience of the visual novel.
Yeah, there have been a few kind of acclaimed Western ones in the last few years. Citizen Sleeper is one, and then there were like a few others as well.
So to that, or were you gonna say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, and then we basically, I reached out to Elby, who I worked with at Thambite previously, because I knew that they were like a big visual novel person, and they have played like a lot of Japanese ones, and you know other kinds of those games. So like they had the genre knowledge and like a lot of like the knowledge of like the conventions and what people expect. Yeah. So that was like, okay, so we've got like this triad of people who are all bringing different things to the table, and it's fell together really well.
Well, so like the question I wanted to cut in with was like about the more the design of the game, and like how is the pathing in the game something that like you're working on? Because like you as writer, I would imagine like are those asks coming from NB? Like, I need you to write this path line, and are they handling like the choice trees, or like are you making decisions about the choice trees like as you're writing, or what's that process like?
Yeah, so it was a very like collaborative process between LB and I. So we we had this at this high level doc of like this Notion spread, like not a spreadsheet, but like a flow chart of like, okay, here's like the starting and here's like the endings, and how do we get from there to there, and like what are the different paths. And so it was a lot of just like, you know, meeting every few days and being like, okay, like what are the next block of like scenes chronologically that we need, and then we would split those up in terms of like who was writing which. and then figure out, okay, like, and then where do those go from there? And, you know, like we hadn't figured out the whole thing when we started it. Like, I think we were making choices about those stuff, like as we went, like, okay, we're like at the halfway point. Like we knew that like, okay, these people are around at this time, you know, these people are doing this thing, but like, how do we get them there? We swapped a lot of stuff around. So it was a very like, it wasn't like, you know, one person was a writer and one was like the narrative designer and like picking like the path. It was like we were kind of both sharing those duties. And thankfully we work really well together. Like I think that could be a difficult situation for people who didn't know each other as well, or like had more like, well, no, I want to do it this way. Like, because I feel like, you know, it was my my concept initially that I was bringing, but like it very much is like, you know, there's like the handprints of all three of us on it and on like basically every level of it. So it was really cool. I mean, that's one of the nice things about having a really small team, right? Is you can kind of all have a voice on that stuff. And obviously there's limitations in terms of the scope of project that you can do, but it's a trade-off, right? Of like scope versus involvement.
Yeah. Is it? I mean, maybe this is like an LB question, but like you can speak specifically to Fledgling Manor. Like, is it meant to be replayed? Like, because I'm so inexperienced in this genre, like, but it makes it clear that there's different endings and some might be bad and some might be good or whatever. So like, do you have to consider that as part of like the making process? Like, okay, if people play it again, let's like skip all the intro stuff and like get them to a decision tree or something like that.
Yeah. So obviously for any game, there's going to be people who either don't finish it or play it once and they're done. And that's fine. With visual novels, a lot of it for people who play a lot of these is they want to find all the endings and they want to find all of the like CGs, right? The full screen arts that you unlock in certain paths. So one really nice thing is that we're using an engine called RenPy, which is based on Python, but is basically designed for making visual novels. And so it has a lot of these things built in that you would want to have. So the game knows, like if you've played through you know, what to one ending and you're like, I'm going to start over. But you know, I don't want to hear the tape stuff again. I've heard it. I know that stuff. You can have it skip until you get to a point where either there's a choice or there's material you haven't seen before. And like that's kind of built into the engine, which is really nice. Yeah. So it like it saves us like a lot of time because it has these things of like, oh, we know people want to do this, so we'll make it really easy for you to have that feature.
Do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can totally do like if you finish the game and start a second playthrough, you can like hit a skip button and it'll just like speed through to something like the next part you haven't seen. Yeah, it's great, right? Because I kind of had that experience playing like Baldur's Gate. When that came out, Baldur's Gate 3. Like, you know, when I played through the game the first time, the second time I was like, okay, this first area, like there's like different things you can do, but like I'm like, I don't also want to speed through to like the next choice, you know, and just like get there. And you can't really do that. So it's nice that you can in this stuff.
I feel like it's a thing that like a lot of modern games have started to like come to terms with. Like 20 years ago, every cutscene was like, we spent a lot of time animating this and you're going to watch it, whether you like it or not, gamer. But to the point of like RenPy and like what's built into it and not, like like is the rewinding on the mouse wheel, like was that a design decision that y'all made, or is that like codified
standard
in RenPy?
I think that's built into the engine. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
wow, cool.
Yeah, so that is something, and you know, it's designed to be able to be played. I think like you can either click through stuff or you can just use a keyboard. Like if you can just hit space to go through stuff, and you can even use like a controller too if you need it. You know, you're just like, I got to just like lock in with my Xbox controller.
My
like speed run, just like slamming that A button, skipping those. And because of that, like I'm fairly certain it'll be playable on Steam Deck too, which is kind of nice because it's not a very like high system requirements game, so it's gonna run perfectly. And you know, some people like those kinds of experiences on the Steam Deck where it's like a little more relaxed and you're not like playing Sekiro or something, you know?
Yeah.
Sure.
The other part of this that we haven't really touched on yet is like the reality show part of it. And it's funny because our last episode we did, Sean was talking about Survivor a lot. And
Survivor.
So what, like you said you came up with the concept, like why reality show? Do you have like, are you super into reality shows? Are there specific ones you have like inspo from? Or like, talk to me about that. Yeah.
So it's kind of funny, but like, I don't watch reality shows either.
Okay,
sure.
So this was another. Was like these were the two big things that LB brought to the table were visual novel knowledge and reality show knowledge. So they were like the perfect person to bring into this. Like this game would not exist if it were just me and Shade. But you know, I was into reality shows during the first American boom of them in the early 2000s. Like, you know, I watched the first few seasons of Survivor. I really liked a show called The Mole, which was hosted by Anderson Cooper.
Yeah, I've heard of that. I think it's still going on.
It
might
like
still be Germany or something like that.
Well, all these shows were stolen from like from Germany and the UK, Switzerland. Yeah, like all these formats were just sort of like, you know, taken and changed. But The Mole was like they were all working together, but there was like one person who was trying to undermine them, and you had to figure out who it was.
Among Us.
One of the play shows.
It was Among Us, the show like 20 years before Among Us.
That's funny.
So I didn't have like, you know, I'm looking back and I'm like, why did I think a reality show was like a good premise? And I think, I don't know, I liked the incongruity of it, of like vampires on TV is very funny to me. And it also like the reality show element of it is sort of like, I mean, the whole game is set up in this way where I don't know like how obvious it is. It's one of these things where you write something and you're like, well, this is like pretty obvious to me, but then it might not be to other people, and that's fine. But the whole thing is kind of like a metaphor or like an allusion, I guess, to just a lot of the ways that economic systems are set up right now. Like this competition to get work, find a job. And a lot of it was based on the feelings that I had after I was laid off in 2023 of like, you know, you'd see a job posting go up and then, you know, 1,000 people are applying for it. Or you go on LinkedIn and like all of your peers are like, I can't find work, I'm desperate, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, this is if I get a job, it's because these people didn't, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And it's like you start to feel crazy and it starts to like erode your relationships with other people if you let it, because you feel like, oh, I'm in competition with these people because these people, the people at the top like it that way. And it's better for them to have us, you know, struggling against each other for these limited jobs that exist. So, you know, I didn't want to like hit people over the head with that, but I feel like, you know, if you're like reading for themes, you're like, oh yeah, I know it is kind of fucked up how there's like this, how in society, you know, we're pitted against each other and only a few people can succeed and it's at the expense of these other people. But,
well, there's a moment in the game, like the first culling sequence was a sequence where like it kind of like in real time, I was like, wait, I don't know about this. Like this doesn't, and it wasn't just like, oh, I don't want them to die. It was just like, wait, I don't want to have to choose for this person to die. And like, thankfully, like the choice is like sort of played out by you as writer. Like, and I do wonder if in the full game, and you don't have to answer this, but like I do wonder in the full game if there are like pathings of like actually player choosing to kill characters, which is like hard to process kind of. And then Rocky speaks up like, I don't like this, bro. Like it's like, I mean, man.
Yeah, so there is like, we try to, you know, get into that of like, you know, if you, there are other stories like this of like strangers are thrown into a situation, you know, Saw or like 999 or things like that, or like
Squid Game is
like, oh, you have to do something horrible to survive or to win some prize, and if you don't do it, you're gonna get killed or whatever. And obviously, like most people would object to that, right? At least at first, they would be like, "This is fucking horrible. I don't want to do this." And some of the like the other characters don't so much, or we don't see that from them so much, and that's partly because they've sort of been in this world longer and they're more used to it. which isn't to say that they don't like fight or whatever when they're, picked. Some of them do. But
Cool.
yeah, it's like, this was one of the things we talked about when we first started designing it is like, okay, the game is based around this idea of voting people out to be killed. And that's a tough thing to do in a choice-based game, because if you choose, like if you have full choice over that, and if your vote actually is the one that decides a lot of these things, if you look at that branching path, it's like, there are ways to do it where it can be simplified, but you're looking at a game where there's like, from the first culling, there's any number of possible states of like, oh, there's these 7 people are left, and then these 6 people are left, and it just
it's a lot.
What's the dialogue downstream?
Exactly, like that. It would have taken several years, like
Sure.
as opposed to 6 months, which is how long we've been working on it.
Yeah.
And, so there are choices later on where you're influencing that, where you're deciding like, here are the people who are going to survive at this point. Here's who's going to die. Earlier on, a lot of it is like, that's like kind of something we're struggling with, and we're still tweaking that as we lead up to release, of like, how do you make the player feel like their choices are like, and matter in this world, while also not having to like change the entire game around those things. So
it's a different
there
game.
are like ways of doing it, and like LB brought in a lot of this knowledge with reality shows where you do want to vote with the crowd early on a lot of the time, because if you don't, that starts to raise questions of if you're a team player, or if you're like, you're throwing your vote away, all these other things. So we're trying to like, mask that to an extent, while also making room for choices that do affect things, because there are different routes and different people do survive in those. And it's something we're still tweaking.
That sounds super hard.
Different choices are more reasonable.
to
produce. Well, I also like want to riff about it a little bit, just in terms of like, because I want to talk about Rocky as a protagonist specifically, like, but just before we get into that, like, I do tend to think of like, there's a lack of agency on the player, because like Rocky has a lack of agency, and it's like kind of as clean as that. Like, it's like, he barely knows what's going on, so like, what information do you have? And it's like, so the question I have for you is like, what was your process in like conceiving of and writing Rocky? Like, how did you break? Because it is like a tabula rasa, like protagonist, like capital P protagonist type character. Like, how did you figure Rocky out?
So we had talked about initially, like, a lot of visual novels, I guess dating sims specifically, will have a character who doesn't even have a face, who is kind of like this faceless protagonist. And the idea there is like, you're projecting yourself into that role, right? Like, that's you. And
It's me.
You're dating these Japanese, schoolgirls or whatever.
I wasn't gonna say it.
I mean, you're also a Japanese like schoolboy, so it's not as weird as it sounds. But a lot of visual novels that aren't dating sims do have defined characters, and for the setting is kind of like weird, right? In terms of there's like a lot of stuff we need to introduce and set up so that you know what's going on. So having this character who doesn't really know anything is like a good way of doing that. Like having this player, stand-in who's learning about the world as we do. At the same time, we didn't want to have just a character who has no personality at all. So we tried to have Rocky be like, he has certain like verbal tics, he has certain interests, he has certain like beliefs, but those can change over the course of the game. So like, he's going in as a certain kind of person, but this is like a really crazy experience. And so like the way that plays out is going to shape him in different ways. So there are 3 main endings. Well, there are 4 real main endings. There are like a couple of bad endings that you can get as well. But
sure.
And he's like a very different person by the end of each of those, because of like these different things that have happened and things that he's gone through. And we tried to make the choices like in kind of line with this character of like who this person is. But at the same time, people can sometimes do different things in different situations. So you have choice of like, how do I feel about this? Or what am I going to do in response to this? And you can kind of shape who he is. And I feel like that we've just, we've been doing a bunch of playtesting and people have been so far like pretty pleased with how that works. Like the danger is you end up with a guy who doesn't feel like a person and is just like a completely different guy at the end of all these things. But I think we've struck a good balance where it's like he has like a distinct enough voice, but you also feel like you're playing as him, like doing things that sort of matter.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of ask, like, as a follow up to that about like perspective, because and the answer might just be this is what every visual novel does, so it is what it is. But I was wondering, like, why is it? Because it's like being in first person makes a lot of sense, but why is it important to you that we hear his inner thoughts also? You know what I mean? Like because he enters a room and he'll be like, these refrigerators look like a Best Buy, or like that, that scene or something. Whereas like some other games, like I think Citizen Sleeper's more like this.
Yeah.
You might just enter and like the player makes their own, opinion, has their own opinion of what a room looks like or something.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And there is like this, there's a difference too between like first and second person in text-based games. And I think the historic convention is first person, is like this character is narrating stuff. But there are more, I don't know if it's a Western Japanese thing, but I've definitely played more recent Western like adventure / narrative heavy games where it's like you. And there's stuff like Baldur's Gate where it's like the voice, the narrator is addressing you. But then there's stuff like Disco Elysium where you're playing a guy who at first is kind of like a cipher, but you sort of learn more about him as he goes on, where the game is addressing you as you a lot of the time too with the thought cabinet. And I think that I felt more natural. It felt like, you're getting the world through the perspective of this person. And that is like carrying a lot of stuff of like, he's like kind of grappling with the situation that he's in. And it felt important to have that in there. I guess it would be like a much shorter game text-wise if all that stuff was like gone and it was just like, if you're just thinking about how you feel. Yeah. I mean, that's like, it's a stylistic choice, but...
Yeah, like you're a writer. Like a lot of the funniest stuff in the demo are Rocky's observations and his inner thoughts. And I was like, well, this is an opportunity to write, because otherwise you would basically only be writing dialogue if it was the other way.
And it would feel a little strange. I think it would feel a little sparse.
Right. I agree. Yeah, I was just wondering if you like had thought about that. Yeah.
Like, because there is like all this, there's a bunch of writing too, like describing the environments kind of, which goes back to like one of like my big takeaways from what I played was like, I was talking about it before, like the swirl of like character and setting and sound and all these different things. And like, what am I saying about it? Just that like, I think there's like an effect maybe that like being able to move between like I'm trying to craft a question out of it. Like how do you in a given sequence like choose how to like ping pong between like dialogue and interiority and just like now we're in this room. Like is there like clear like table setting mechanisms in place like in your writing process or like how do you move between the different like types of writing basically?
I think a lot of it comes down to rhythm. And this is true for, just straight fiction as well. I think a lot of the times if you get into a block of dialogue that goes on for too long, people start to lose a sense of like the context that this is happening in. So in a novel where you're in the third person, you would maybe break that up with descriptions of how the characters are acting or their expressions or what's happening around them or sense details. And because we're not doing third person, because we're in first person, a lot of it is like, okay, we have a bunch of dialogue, and then maybe we have some like rocky like reflection on what's happening. Or, we break it up with character leaves, someone else shows up, or something happens in this scene that changes it. So a lot of it is just like,
Rhythm,
writing it out
movement.
and then like going back and like playing through it and being like, oh, this is too slow. We have to like add something here. So that's the nice thing about Ren'Py too, is like it's very easy to edit the script while you're like playtesting. So you can like have it reload when you make a change.
Like
it'll just,
immediately.
So like because it's like, it's not a huge game that it has to recompile. You can be like, I don't like this. Like, I'm going to tweak this scene a little bit and like reload it and then to like go through it again. So that makes playtesting like so much easier because you have this really quick back and forth between like edits and seeing how things turn out. So a lot of it was this iterative process of like, we had versions of scenes, we would go through and play them, be like, it could be a little more dynamic, or this could be a little slower, slow it down a bit.
It's the thing I'm getting from what you're saying is like how timing based it is, and about like momentum of a given scene, and like the back and forth of these things, and like it's feeling. It's not vibe based, but it's like
whenever there was like a text box that was like 3 lines long, I was like, "Whoa, this is a long one." Like Merritt's popping off,
Merritt's got something to say.
Holy smokes!
And like
it's
like
about to get philosophical on me.
It's like you vary the length of text boxes because you don't want just like full dialogue the whole time. It's like any game. Like a Mario level, you're varying like the pits, the enemy placements to create a sense of interest and of momentum and change over time. And it's done exactly the same thing, right? Because it's text, but it still is that like you don't want like a monotonous, like constant drone. Like you have short lines, longer lines, and like there is kind of a flow to it with the way that it types out the text as you go. It was like a learning process for sure.
Totally. Like how to define your own pace, like in this format. I want to, before we hop off, I want to run my mouth about 8 a little. Like I want to just like dedicate a big chunk of the show to just like 8.
8 kicks ass.
Like 8.
It's a character.
They're the fan favorite for sure. Like they.
Is it? Are people loving 8?
People have popped off about them. They people have gone crazy for this character. We've kept a pretty tight lid on the sort of details about who this person is because you sort of find that out. So there's 3 routes through the game, right? And they sort of depend on who you ally yourself with at a certain point. So the 3 characters who are like who you can sort of take with you to the end are Stefan, Anya, and 8. And you find out a lot more about 8 like on their route. Like when you meet them, they're kind of like they're this like weird like monster that is like kind of we mentioned Nosferatu.
But they're super chill right off the bat too. Yeah. They're like saying stuff that's just like, oh yeah, hell yeah.
What's like the cold quote? What was that? It's
what was it? There's nothing to learn from this. It's just like, oh fuck.
Yeah,
it fucking gets it.
It was a lot of fun writing them because a lot of the other characters are just like either psychos or like self-involved or weird and like kind of like reclusive. And you do learn more about sort of everyone's deal as you go on for the most part, except Grace. Grace just fucking dies right away.
And she brought that on herself.
Grace sucks.
I do kind of want to I like the idea of creating like an alternate version where like Grace sticks around to the end or something. But Grace was a fun character to write too. It's just like this kind of like airy, like self-improvement, like business, like maniac
that
everyone is like, oh, I hate this person. Like,
I kind of want to know Grace ITM. I listen to this Bachelor podcast. This is getting way too deep, but they call it an ITM. It's like in the moment. That's when it's like, the person's one-on-one with the camera.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what it's traditionally called. But I kind of wanted a Grace ITM before the culling, just being like, I can't fucking believe they voted me out. Like, I had an alliance.
So, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
we do have confessionals, which is I think what a lot of shows
that
call those.
confessional. That's what it's called. Yeah.
We do have those later on in the game, but it was like a thing of like where we were talking for a while about, should the whole game be like as if you're like watching it
or is
on
it
TV,
a production?
and then you see
Right.
And it's like that could work, but it raises a lot of questions. And we decided to just go with like, no, you're actually in the moment on the show and sort of seeing behind the scenes. But then you do sort of get access to the production side of things later on, and you can sort of like watch people's confessionals to learn about them.
Sure,
I'm psyched for that.
It's cool. Yeah, there's like you get some details on some of the other characters, but 8, yeah, I kind of figured that 8 would be popular just because everyone loves like a nice weirdo, like a nice weird monster freak,
like a weirdo who's nice as opposed to like someone who seems really nice but is like a piece of shit. Right?
Like, and there's kind of a lot of those. I mean, yeah,
it's a reality show.
It's a reality show. Yeah, they're like not great people.
Yeah.
But yeah, also I think Shade did a really incredible design with all the characters, but with 8, definitely really like, because my goal with that character was to or the concept was, this is someone who, and I forget if we talked about this in the demo, but it's like not super secret or anything. This is a character who used to be a runway model. Like a fashion person.
Sick.
And so like some of the clothing and stuff, it has these elements of designers that I like. So like there's sort of a Rick Owens kind of thing with the hoodie. And
cool.
I think you'll enjoy that. Like I said to Sean before you jumped on, I was like, is 8 like a former NBA player? Like they're 7 feet tall. Like what the hell is this?
Yeah. So they're it's like that would be the other the other possibility. But yeah, they are supposed to be like a former fashion model who, for whatever reason, when they became a vampire, turned into like this kind of monster that the other people didn't. And we kind of get into that later on too. It's one of the little lore things about the world. Because that was one thing too, is like some of these characters came from like, Nico and the Executioner came from Shade's past work. And then at least one character, so Tay was LB's character in a game of Vampire the Masquerade that I ran. So Tay was an existing character. So like we have this stuff we're bringing in from Vampire the Masquerade, but we're like, okay, we have to get away from that. Like we have to like file off the serial numbers and like change some of the rules and stuff of the world. And we did that with 8 and with a couple other characters. Tay is someone who I think that was a tough one to write, just because. So Tay is a Christian influencer. And I think a lot of people, their reaction to that character is going to be negative initially. But he has kind of a big arc. Like he goes places. It gets really weird and I think really interesting. He became one of my favorite characters by the time I was done writing that stuff.
I think I clocked somewhere else that like that what we do in the shadows is like a pretty like are you referencing that just like when you're telling people about the game, or like were you actually like informed by the game? I've described it or the show rather
in the past as What We Do in the Shadows meets Big Brother.
Yeah.
Because I've definitely I haven't kept up with that show lately, but the first like 3 seasons of it I really love. And obviously Matt Berry is like a beautiful genius. And there are like I think there's like maybe 1 or 2 references to that show. Like,
cool.
Like not as like, oh, this show exists in the world, but like to like allusions to it.
If you know.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. I was gonna just invoke that like Tay has like some shades of Guillermo. Alon doesn't know. Alon knows nothing of.
I mean,
truly like
back,
that. Just
I'm
like
going back to the beginning of the episode because I'm like, my dream is like Fledgling Manor shows up on the list of vampire traits in folklore and fiction with Wikipedia.
Yes.
because I'm such a nerd about it. I saw Tay's cross around their neck, and I was like, not burning them. Interesting.
Yeah, cross Cross doesn't do it. Water doesn't do it.
Yeah, one of the stats. Yeah.
Yep. So they're gonna have to update that.
Soggy and milk, though. We don't know. We don't know unless it's on the page.
It might happen. you'll have to like play through.
You have to wish list the game to find out.
We'll all have to play through it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's a good place to end, though.
Yeah,
but
that's
Merritt,
pretty
please,
smooth.
if you know, whatever you want to plug. I know we're pushing for people to wish list the game, and just tell the people where to find you and stuff like that.
Yeah. If you want to wish list the game, it's called Fledgling Manor. It's on Steam. I think the release date, we haven't said the exact release date, but it is coming out in December. We were aiming for November. We had to push back just for a couple of reasons, but it's coming out in December, like I would say early, mid-December. And, even if you're not totally sure of like, is this my thing? Like hitting the wishlist button, like, I don't know if people know how the back end of Steam works, but Steam wants to make money, right? And they make money by selling games because they get 30%. So if they think something is going to do well, they will push it harder.
Oh,
so
yeah.
the more wishlist something gets, the more they will push it. So it's a big help to us and to like any indie dev. Even if you're not sure if you're going to like buy it on release or maybe ever, just like hitting that button is a big deal.
Smash that wish
list button. And then I still have a Twitter account. I'm not really using it. I might delete it. I'm not sure yet. It's rough
we're not
out there. But I am on Blue Sky, merritt.com on there, and that's where I mostly post these days. So yeah, you can follow me on there if you want.
Sick.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for coming on,
really fun.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Good talking to you.